Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ask a Doulagiver. My name is Suzanne O'Brien. Thank you so much for being here. This is episode number 4. And again, Ask a Doulagiver is a platform that I developed so that I can share all of the information that I have from, again, being a former hospice nurse and a former oncology nurse, and having the privilege of working with thousands of patients and families in my career. I also get every single day emails, Facebook messages from people all over the world asking questions, and I wanted to be able to share the answers and to share this platform since all of us are touched by this thing called end of life. And with the right kindness, education, and support, it can go really, really well. So Ask a Doulagiver was developed to be that platform, and I want to answer some of the questions that came in this week. Okay, the first question is from Dorothy P. Suzanne, I'm caring for my mother who's 84 years old and on hospice. How will I know when we are getting close to the end? How will I know when to call family members to tell them it's time? Thank you for all you do. Okay, Dorothy. So this is actually a very interesting thing that a lot of times when I do come in to work with people at end of life, one of the first questions that patients will ask me is, how much time do I have? And of course, there are much bigger pictures going on here that is not in our control. And even when doctors do give a estimate of the prognosis of the time, maybe 2 months, that is not always accurate. So there are different elements that are at play there. But I will tell you that once someone completely stops eating and drinking for about a 6 to 8 hour period, so of course, sometimes people don't want a meal or they just are not thirsty or whatnot, not to panic at that moment. But once there's 2 consecutive meal times in a row where people are declining food, that usually is an indication that they are starting to head into their transition phase. And that is, again, something that we can measure a time on. So once somebody stops completely eating and drinking for about, again, that 6 to 8 hour period, they will go into what's called a transition phase. They'll get weaker and go into that sleep state. So it's usually hours to days in the transition phase. Then they go into a sleep coma, and it's hours to days within the sleep coma that they'll have their end of life. That is usually how it works. Now, I've seen everything from what science says is not possible for people that have lived without food and water for very long periods of time, and science says that's not possible. I was there, so it does happen. And I've also seen people who have left earlier than we anticipated. So there is a way to quantify a time. Once your mother stops eating and drinking completely, that means she's heading into her transition phase. And that is the time that you should alert people that they should come. If you're having that kind of vigil ceremony, that is when you can quantify a time. Great question, Dorothy. Thank you. And we're sending you so much love. Okay, let's answer the next question. This comes from Amy L. She asks, I just learned that a doctor's diagnosis of terminal illness is required for hospice care. Can a caregiver call hospice and arrange an evaluation without a doctor's diagnosis or involvement? This brings up another question, which is, what if a patient really is at the end of life, but a doctor will not give the diagnosis necessary to be on hospice services? The family would really like to get her on hospice. She's working with a family that really wants to get her on hospice, and the doctor is not wanting to put the patient on hospice. Is there another way? Okay, so let's break this question down because there's a few in there. So the first one is, yes, you need a diagnosis for end of life to be admitted to hospice services. But your second one is that, can a caregiver or someone request an evaluation from hospice to see if that person is eligible for that? And yes, you can. So anyone can make a hospice referral, but the nurse will have to come out and do an evaluation to deem if that patient is indeed hospice appropriate. If that's the case, then they can have the medical director sign on as that order to admit that patient. They don't need the doctor that's treating the patient or another doctor to do that. They have doctors that are within hospice that can indeed put that patient on hospice services with that medical diagnosis as an order. And so that really does answer your last question, but it brings up another question, that what if a patient is really at the end of life, but the doctor will not give the diagnosis necessary to be on hospice? And this does happen. There are doctors that feel sometimes that, no, you're not ready for hospice. We still want to keep trying, or whatever their reasons are. If that patient and family really believe that hospice is where they want to be, they don't have to accept that that doctor is saying, no, that's not their only route to hospice. You can call your hospice, you can have that evaluation, and then the hospice medical director can admit that person to hospice care. Thank you for that. That's a really good question, Amy. Okay, the next one comes from Jennifer D. And this isn't a question, but she wanted to share something. She says that, by the way, although, okay, so she's talking about understanding in our training how people will wait for, there's 3 reasons why people will not have their end of life. They're waiting for someone to come, they're waiting for someone to leave, which is more common, the bedside, or they're waiting for something to be resolved. So she says, by the way, although I knew my mother-in-law needed permission to go, giving permission to go, I had no idea that my darling sister needed me to go, to leave the bedside, to leave the room. Through this whole process, that is the gem I will forever hold in my heart and cannot thank you enough. Thank you, Jennifer. That means everything. So what I want you to know is, when you do learn how to care for those at end of life, and we have the free level 1 family caregiver by Doula Givers, so many people have found peace and healed from grief for taking that course, because they now could understand why things were happening, what was going on. And so many people have an incredible amount of guilt for leaving the room, and then their loved one has their end of life and they weren't right there at the bedside. And that was exactly how it was supposed to be. So there's so much more to this, and it's really incredibly beautiful. So I want to thank you all for your questions. Please keep writing in at askadoulagiver@gmail.com. We will answer your questions. We will send them back on email or answer them in this forum, which, by the way, helps everyone. And we are a global community. My name is Suzanne O'Brien. Thank you so much. This was, again, Ask a Doula Giver, and I will see you in the next episode. Have a fantastic day, everybody.